Hello, hello. I think I'm talking to myself right now, but this is all going to get recorded. So if you're watching this on the video recording, then welcome. We are doing the ISTE Lit chat right now, and we're talking all about sketchnotes or visual note taking. And so we've had a lively discussion for about the last 40 minutes or so. And now we're going to do a little video mini workshop. And now we officially have one person. Now we've got 5. Oh my goodness. Wow, you guys must have just seen the link. So I'm going to try to keep the chat open over here on my other screen. So if you see me looking over here, I'm trying to follow along with you guys. But yeah, this is gonna go probably pretty fast. the tweets anyway, so I don't know if I'll be able to totally keep up. Oh, we got 15 now. This is awesome. Okay, so I'm Matt Miller, author of Ditch That Textbook, and we've been, like I said, we've been talking about sketchnotes. So I wanted to just give you some of the stuff that I talk about whenever I do presentations about sketchnotes and kind of walk you through some of those things. So I'm going to try real quick here to load up, I should have done this ahead of time, to load up a, here we go, a slide deck. And I'm gonna share it with you real fast. And I'm actually gonna do some sketching here on the screen too. I'm gonna try to do all this in 15 minutes. So hopefully you guys can all see my slides right now. Actually, I'm gonna stop for just a second and switch things. No, you know what, let's just do it. We're just gonna roll with it. We're just gonna go. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so we got these slides here. So sketchnotes, tools and tactics for visual note taking. That's what we're going to dig into. And so let's see. I've got a couple of examples. I showed you some examples during the chat. So here's point number 1: is that you don't have to be an artist to create great sketchnotes. I think this is super important to remember, that stick figures and little sketches made out of, you know, like a square and a circle and a triangle have a lot of the same brain benefits and keep the mind active, much like you know, fancy art. So you don't have to be a great artist to get the benefits of doing this. If you enjoy it, just go ahead and do it. Sketchnotes are for you to help you remember and organize. So even if they don't make sense to somebody else, if they're making sense to you, then they're effective. And then the third thing is, sketchnoting is a skill like anything else. Practice makes proficient. Somebody mentioned this in the chat. I'm so glad that they did, because when I very first started doing this, I really had no experience with it whatsoever. And I just thought, hey, this looks like something fun. Saw people doing it on Twitter, and so I thought I would give it a shot, and I did, and have just kind of stuck with it. And so I don't feel like I'm the best out there. You know, my sketches are kind of sketchy. They're kind of rough a lot of times, but I enjoy it, and it helps. So anyway, moving right along here. Where will you sketch? And we talked a little bit about this in the chat. A lot of times people like to use paper and notebooks, and that is absolutely fine. I personally like being able to sketch on my iPad, and I'm going to show that to you and show you the app that I use. And you might start to see that people who sketch get kind of picky about their paper sometimes. And so the more that you do it, you may even find that there's a kind of paper that you like too. Now, as far as apps, these are 3 really good apps to get you started. My absolute favorite is this one right here. It's called Paper. It's by a company called 53. That's the one that I sketched all of the examples that I showed to you in the chat. Flip Ink is a good one too. These are all free, by the way. Adobe Draw is a little bit more complex one that's really good. You may have seen Sylvia Duckworth's name dropped into the chat a couple of times. All of her fantastic sketches that she does, as far as I know anyway, are done on Adobe Draw, which lets you do some layering. So that's kind of like next level stuff. So this is what the screen looks like for the app called Paper by 53, which I really like to use. And so I'm going to show it to you right here on my iPad, if I can get something pulled up here. Here we go. Okay, so here it is. Hopefully you can kind of see it. It looks about the same as it did over there on the screen. And so basically you've got all these tools that you can use. Actually, I'm going to try to swipe. There we go. So we've got an eraser. We've got a fountain pen, which you can kind of see if you start slow, it's real narrow. And then if you start going faster, it gets wider. So it's almost like a calligraphy pen. Yes, if you're wondering, I have my iPad propped up on my nose. Just in case you were wondering. The pencil really does look like graphite on paper. It's kind of hard to see in here, but you've got wide point Sharpie, which looks kind of like this. You've got a fine point Sharpie, which I kind of like how whenever you put it down onto when you put your finger down onto the screen, it kind of makes a little dot at the beginning like a fine point Sharpie normally would. And then you've got your watercolor paintbrush. I can't do this one in black. We got to do a different color. And I love to be able to use this to fill things in. So anyway, those are some of the things that you can do there. And then you can take whatever you sketch on this and save it as like an image file, like a JPEG. And then you can, tweet it, you can save it, you can put it onto a website, just a variety of different things that you can do with it once it's there. So that's my favorite app right there. And if you want to go get it, it's available for iOS. You can get it for iPad. You can get it for iPhone. Even though the screen is a little bit smaller, you can still use it there. I don't think they have an Android version out yet. So let's switch back over to my slides real quick. Okay. So what should I sketch? And we talked a little bit about this earlier too. This was a sketch that I did on a TED Talk. Somebody in the chat, I saw it and I can't remember who it was, but somebody in the chat talked about their students sketching TEDx talks, I think. This is exactly the same kind of thing I did. This was one of my early ones. And I just did the title in the middle and then just kind of filled things in around the outside. And I tried to make sure that there was a visual with each one. See, I come from, when I was in college, I wasn't an education major, I was a journalism major. And so I am a word guy, and I have to remind myself to go back to the pictures all the time, or otherwise I would just fill this thing up with words and all of a sudden it's not a sketch note anymore. It doesn't have any visuals in it. So if that's you, then don't worry, you're not alone. So we've got that. This is one I did of a book. If you're familiar with Teach Like a Pirate, one of my favorite education reads of all time. And after reading the second half of it, I saw all of these hooks and I thought, man, these are great, but I'm going to forget them. So I just sketched them all out on my iPad and I did a little doodle with each one of the names of the hooks. And since then, whenever I pull this up, it's like the whole second half of the book just comes flooding back into memory. And so that's an effective way to use that. By the way, if you want to see all of these slides and then any of my sketchnoting resources, you can always just go to ditchthattextbook.com/sketch. I dropped that into the chat. And if you missed it, it's ditchthattextbook.com/sketch. Now, the fifth question in our chat had to do with how can we use these as teachers? And I know whenever I go to a conference, one of my favorite things to do is to watch a keynote and to sketch what the keynote is talking about and capture all of my favorite takeaways. Now, when you do that, let's see, let's make that full screen again. When you do that, here's the issue with that, is that's live sketchnoting. And that is a whole different can of worms than sketchnoting at your own pace. And so that's something that's taken a lot of practice, is to listen. It's almost like listen out of one ear and then sketch while you're thinking and processing all at the same time. And it's a lot to do all at once. So live sketchnoting, if you try to start your sketchnoting journey with live sketchnoting, it might be a little bit too much. And you might remember that for your students too, that if you tell them to do visual notes while you're talking, then it's a lot. It's a lot to do all at once. Now, one thing that's nice about that is that it forces you to prioritize your information. This is another one of the brain benefits, I think, of sketchnoting, is that you have all this stuff coming in and you've got to pick out the good stuff to get into your sketch. And so it kind of forces you to take 100 ideas and boil it down into like 15 that only get into your sketch. And so that is one thing that's tricky about live sketching, but that's what this was. You can even see that your sketch has to kind of morph depending on how well you use your time. You can see on the left-hand half of this that I was real like intricate and detailed. And then if you notice on the right, there's this big fat green pull-out quote. Guess what happened? I only sketched about half of the page and she started wrapping up. So I had to fill the rest of the page in pretty quickly. And that's how I did it. Okay, so some other examples here. Okay, so how do I do it? This is probably the big question that you've got if you're like most people. So I've got a couple of ideas for you on how to do it, how to do sketchnoting. And I boil it down basically into, it's like every sketch basically has these three main elements. You've got text, you've got images, and you've got structure. So let's kind of walk through these real quick. First of all, you've got text. And I don't know if you've thought about it or not, but your handwriting is kind of like your own font. And if you think about when we do any sort of digital writing, having a variety of fonts is usually a good thing. And within one font, you have different variations of that font. So you've got like this is my regular sketching font. And I just found that I like the all caps with the little caps and then the one big cap at the beginning. That's just the way that I like to do it personally. And so this is an example of my regular font, but I also have a bold version. And that's just where instead of making, to make this a capital A, instead of making one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, I'll do 2, 2, 2. So I'll kind of like double up on it and it makes it bold. An extra downstroke. So anytime that I have one of those great big long downstrokes coming down, I'll do like a double line. You can very clearly see two lines. And it kind of gives it a little bit more of kind of like an elegant formal look. So these are all just little things that you can do to change your font or your handwriting, so to speak, to give it a different feel. You've got serifs. If you've ever noticed how a font like Times New Roman has the little feet at the top and the bottom, but a font like Arial does not. Those are serifs, and they say that serifs make your writing more legible whenever people are reading it. And so by adding these little feet, it can add a little bit of legibility. And the bubble letters. See, I had to pull these out of my past back when I was in elementary school and middle school. I don't know if anybody else did this, but I used to write these all over my papers. And so I just kind of pulled that out. And if there's one word that I really want to emphasize, or if I want to make a title, a lot of times I'll use the block letters or the bubble letters. Okay, so that was text. Let's talk about images for just a second. I quoted Mike Rohde earlier. He wrote a book called the Sketchnoting Handbook, or the Sketchnote Handbook, which I really love and have read a couple of times. And this was one thing that I took away that I think is really useful to know. Mike says you can draw anything with these 5 shapes. So if you're worried about your artistic ability, don't. Because he says you can draw anything with these 5 shapes. He says use a circle, a square, a triangle, a line, and a dot. And you can make literally just about anything. And so here's some examples. Bowling ball, 4 circles. A coffee cup, you've got an oval, which is kind of like a circle, and you've got some lines, and that's pretty much it. Tree made out of triangles. See, here's the brilliant thing about this, is if you make these sketches with these basic shapes, they do just the same thing for your brain that a really fancy drawing would do. So if you're making a laptop out of a couple of rectangles and some lines, like I always do, that gets the idea across and it makes it sticky in the brain just as well as a fancy drawing would do. Now let's get into people for just a second. And so I've always had the hardest time drawing people and drawing people's faces. And so the nice thing about this same idea we were getting at earlier is that people can be done as stick figures. And there's a lot you can do with a stick figure. I mean, if you bend their arms and their legs in different ways, and even if you angle their bodies in a certain direction, see how this one's running and I've got him angled forward, that can tell an awful lot. That can say an awful lot. And then once you get your stick figure down, you can even add to it a little bit. So this is just a basic stick figure, only I've made the rectangle for the body and then added some pants and some sleeves. And so now it's a little bit better stick figure. And then once you get there, then you can continue to add extras and other little details. So see, if you just kind of take it step by step and continue to kick it up a notch or two, then that kind of adds something to it. Okay, so we talked about text, we talked about images. Now the third element of sketchnoting is structure. And that's the way that you package everything together on the page or on the screen. And so having a little bit of structure ahead of time can really help out. And I would even venture to guess that there are times when we're not even sketchnoting where the structure can really help. And one area in particular is when you're writing on the board. So if you've got a whiteboard or if you've got a chalkboard and you're writing notes for students, a lot of these concepts that I was just talking about with sketchnoting apply right there. So even if you don't want to do sketchnoting per se, you can take some of these things and you can make your ideas stickier in your students' brains by applying some of these ideas. And one of the big ones is structure. So for me, I almost always go back to the donut structure. I don't know if that's like a formal term or anything. I think I made it up, but it's just where I'll put a title in the middle and then I'll just fill things in around the outside that pertain to the title. That's my favorite one. Columns. This is big if you're writing notes on the board for students, that if you know that you're going to have 3 main ideas and you divide your board into 3 columns, that little teeny tiny thing does huge, huge things for your students. So they already know sort of the structure of what you're going to talk about, that you have 3 main points. When you get done with the first 2, they know that you're pretty much 2/3 of the way through your content. So just by adding those 2 little lines onto your board does a ton for students. The free path. This is really good for a story, something that has a beginning and an end. So you start up here in the corner and you kind of weave your way down to the end. And then of course there's the scatter. And this is good for if you don't know the structure ahead of time, or if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, you can always just throw things all over the page. And some of the most artistic, coolest looking sketches I've found have been scatters. Okay. So if we were doing, if I was doing this presentation at a conference, this is where we would actually get a pen and paper and sketch. And so instead of doing that here, I'm just going to suggest that if you haven't really done this before, go give it a shot. So go listen to a TED Talk or a book that you've just recently read, or just something that you've been thinking about, and start to put those ideas onto paper and just give it a shot, you know, because we all improve on things the more that we try it. So anyway, that kind of wraps things up. I'm going to jump back over on Twitter for a couple more minutes. It's getting to be a little bit late for me, so I'll be over there for just a little bit more to kind of interact with you there. But if you got questions, feel free to find me on Twitter. I'm at jmattmiller. Always check out ditchthattextbook.com, where I'm always sharing ideas on technology, creativity, and innovation in the classroom. And of course, there's my book too. Got to show you, Ditch That Textbook, which you can find on Amazon. If you don't have a copy of that, feel free to go check it out. So anyway, it's been wonderful hanging out with you. Hopefully this has been fun to be able to kind of see me face to face and actually hear my voice instead of just read my tweets. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this. This will be saved on my YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/ditchthattextbook. I'll be tweeting out the link to this too, so if you want to come back to it or if you want to share it with somebody. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this tonight, and I'm going to get out of here. So have a great night.